I got the eyes watering. This old girl goes pretty good. Beautiful morning out here today. Little crisp, but still beautiful. We are well into fall now, and you guys can see there behind me, I haven't quite got my sawmill shelter part 2 built. But regardless, I'm out here. I'm not going to work on that quite yet, but I want to talk to you guys about something that sort of involves the sawmill in general. So what I'm going to talk about today is how much time does it actually take to go from one of these beautiful red pines or a tree in general down to a piece of lumber you can build with. I think there's probably a misconception out there, especially for people who don't saw lumber with their own sawmill, that it takes a very short amount of time to go from a tree to a piece of lumber. And that's just not the case. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Glad you guys are all here for this crisp morning, and here we go. Okay guys, I'm going to paint a picture for you, and this picture is not going to be a work of art. It's going to be a theoretical painting. This theoretical painting includes you sitting on your couch like you may be doing right now, and I'm not going to lie, I do it as well. You're sitting on your couch and you're looking at some YouTube videos, some of which include someone using a portable sawmill like that one over there. Now they're cutting lumber left, right, and center. The dust is flying, the offcuts are flying, and they're making beautiful stacks like that. You're thinking to yourself, gee, I got some trees out in the back 40. I can do that. Doesn't look too hard. Put a bit of fuel oil in there, level the bed, and I'm good to go. Yeah, I fell into that trap one time. Now, I'm not going to say it was a bad trap, though. It's a good one. I'm still enjoying being in it. But that trap is the misconception that sawing lumber is a quick process. So if we talk about taking a log, and I'm talking about a length of a tree, putting it on the sawmill and cutting it into boards like these 2x6s, that overall process does not take very long. For me, I can take one length of log, turn it into maybe 4 or 5, even 6 2x6s, assuming it's a good size log, in just a few minutes. Likewise, I can turn any other dimensional lumber into a few pieces of wood in just a few minutes. What takes a great deal of time, however, and this is often overlooked, is the actual processing of a tree onto the ground, cut up, putting it onto the mill, and then getting it ready to saw. That whole process takes a great deal of time, and that's what's often overlooked. Now, depending on your situation, you may be very fortunate and have a source of logs that just get dropped off at your sawmill. Maybe your sawmill is up at a roadway and big log truck just pops up, you pull out the visa or whatever, and they drop them off, and that's great. If you're in my situation though, where the sawmill is quite a bit back in the bush and you got the trees surrounding it, it's going to take you a while just to get set up to cut a tree. I don't always have my cutting equipment with me out at the sawmill. I often have it up at the storage area, so I got to go get it. That's going to take me probably, by the time I get up there and get back, 20 minutes. Factor that in. I also got to think about the maintenance on my chainsaw. Is my chainsaw ready to go? Because I got to sharpen it from time to time. I got to fuel it. I got to oil it, etc., etc. You get out here, you get ready to cut a tree. If you choose a tree here, that's great. This tree is on a main trail. This tree's got all kinds of space to fall. I could probably start up my chainsaw, let it warm up, hit that tree with the saw, cut her down in 5 minutes. Easy. What's next though, is if I choose a tree way back in the bush here, because for whatever reason it's a good size, or I don't know, maybe I'm doing selective cutting, that tree, if I choose it way back in the bush, is probably not going to fall the same way this one did. It's probably going to get hung up. Make sure to factor in a few extra minutes, sometimes an extra hour, to get a hung up tree down to the ground. Now, let's assume the tree's on the ground, whether it's out here or in there. You got to cut that thing into lengths. You got to cut it into lengths like this one. You got to cut it into lengths based on the lumber you're going to mill. That takes time. Now, that's only a few cuts, but before you can make those length cuts, you got to delimb the tree. So you're going up and down the tree, you're delimbing it, you're cutting the top off, and let's just say that takes you 20 minutes. Maybe if you're quick, 10 minutes. Add that on to the initial 20 minutes, half hour, maybe more, that it took you to get the tree onto the ground. Now, if we total up all that time there, and let's just say things went quite well for me, it's probably taken me a good hour for that one tree to hit the ground, get processed where the limbs are off it, tops off it, and it's cut to length. This is where a lot of the time starts to come in. It's what you're going to do with those extra pieces, like the top of the tree, the limbs, etc. For me, I'm in a bush area here. I own this bush. I could just leave it there if I want, could decompose over the years. Or if you're not in that situation, you might have to clean it up. Maybe you got to load it into a trailer. Maybe you got to take that trailer and dispose of it somewhere. Maybe you have to burn it. Who knows? Maybe chip it. I don't know. but that's going to add on to the time. Let's assume you got the rest of that tree processed, the tops, the limbs, etc. So you're ready to get the logs. To get the logs, you need to have some equipment. I don't know about you guys, but about the only tree that I can carry is about 2 feet long and maybe 8 inches wide or 8 inches in diameter. Anything bigger than that, I got to have a piece of equipment. You might use something like an ATV. Maybe you can access it with an old truck, or maybe you're fortunate like myself, and I am very fortunate in that regard, and have a tractor access. That tractor will help you. It'll speed up the process, as will the ATV, as will a truck. If though, however, your log is deep in the bush and you can't quite meander through there easily, you might end up having to use things like come-alongs or winches, lots of chain, cable, lots of rigging. That all adds up to the amount of time it's going to take to get that log to your sawmill. Now, let's assume best case scenario, I'm an optimist. So 1 hour for the tree to hit the ground, and let's say 20 minutes for you to process it, maybe a bit more. And then let's say another 15 minutes for you to go and get the equipment and haul it over to the mill. So you're at, let's say, an hour and a half to 2 hours. And that's probably a fairly good estimate for myself. Now I load it onto my log bunks, and you guys can see my log bunks there. Now I'm ready to start thinking about cutting. So that's just one tree, keep in mind. One tree, I'm thinking approximately 1.5 to 2 hours. Now you could probably say to yourself, heck, I can do that a lot faster. And yeah, I've done it a lot faster too in certain circumstances, but I'm just trying to paint an average picture for you. Once the equipment's out here, once it's oiled up, once it's fueled up, once it's sharpened, yeah, you can cut more than one tree in a lot faster time. But just to get that initial tree to hit the ground, get that initial equipment out here, get the initial equipment ready to go, it's a great deal of time. Now, once the equipment has brought your logs over to your sawmill and you start the cutting process, you can wing through these things pretty quickly. Here's a pile of offcuts on the ground here. I can pretty much square up a log into a cant in, maybe 10 minutes, assuming the log's not too big and I don't have to manhandle it too much. Once I make it into the lumber, then I got to factor in a bit more time to stack the lumber. I got to stack it up so it can dry. And just disregard this pile here. I've been picking through it to get logs out, or lumber out rather, for my other build. But assuming you have to stack it up like this, well, that's going to take some time. You also got to factor in making this. You got to make some stickers, some things to go in between the lumber. That's going to take some time. Not to mention the time it requires for that lumber to sit there and dry. And that's not going to dry overnight. It's not going to dry in 2 weeks. It's going to dry in a lot of months, depending on your climate, of course. Now that you got a beautiful pile of lumber made, that's not the end of the game here. Well, for making lumber it is. You still got the cleanup. See these offcuts? You are still going to have to process them. See all the sawdust over there? You're still going to have to deal with that. See all the bark that's come off and all the odds and ends, sticks and whatnot? You got to deal with that. If you have an opportunity just to push it off to the side and let it pile up, well, that's great. I can tell you firsthand, it will catch up with you and you will eventually have to deal with it. If you're going to chip this like I do to make some wood chips, or bundle it up to sell it, or give it away, or who knows what, that's all going to take time, and that's got to be factored into the overall process of making lumber. Now, once you process your log fully and you've got your offcuts dealt with and your sawdust dealt with and you've got everything processed and you're feeling great because you're all done, don't forget, you're always going to have to keep your sawmill maintained. Mine right here, it doesn't require a lot of maintenance, but it still requires some. I got to keep the blades sharp, so I'm either going to be changing them or I'm going to be sharpening them. I got to make sure there's fuel in it. From time to time, I have to do some oiling of the cables. I have to make sure the alignment's always proper. And I'm going to, because I don't have a concrete foundation under this, I'm going to have to re-level the bed from time to time. All that stuff is factored into making lumber. So don't forget that when you're sitting on the couch. So to wrap up my story here and to sort of end off my Picasso painting that I started doing, when someone asks you how much time it takes you to make a piece of wood from a live tree, don't just say it takes you 10 minutes, because cutting the actual piece of lumber on the mill is not the end of the game. You got to factor in all the things from getting the equipment ready, maintaining it, felling the tree, cutting it to length, cutting the limbs, hauling the tree out of the bush, and then cutting the lumber. So don't just say 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and don't just dream of that in your head as you're surfing the internet. The whole process is lengthy, but I got to tell you, it's definitely well worth it. So keep that internet surfing going. Don't forget to press the buy button from time to time, because I'm going to tell you one thing. That is one of the best purchases I've made. Although the initial cost is going to probably make you grimace a little bit and maybe you know, feel the stress in your wallet, eventually it will pay for itself several times over. That thing has long been paid for, even with the maintenance costs and the new blades and everything else. With the projects I've made, with the lumber that I've made, and the overall cost of lumber, definitely paid for itself and definitely a worthwhile investment for me. If you guys go down to your local hardware store or local lumber yard, as I said, lumber these days with COVID hitting is astronomical. For me, that pile of wood, I don't even know what it would be worth, but I can tell you one of those 2x8s, 2x4s to the left there on the lower setup, one of those is worth about $7 or $8 Canadian right now, and I've got 4 of them there, and then I've got the rest 2x6s, and I'm just looking, I probably got 25 2x6s there. So if you do some quick math, that pile right there is quite expensive, which is crazy to think, because that didn't take me all that long, on the sawmill that is, to make into lumber. So definitely make that purchase at some point. I'm definitely loving the sawmill life. If you guys have any questions at all, put it down below. Maybe you guys have some insight for me that'll help me speed up my efficiency as well, and the efficiency of others. Anyways, guys, as you can tell behind me here, I have a project I got to get back to. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to get down to work. Thanks for being here, folks, and I'll see you next time.